And hello, Bill. It's really great to have you here today.
Very good to be with you.
So,
I've been suitably introduced, so now let's get to work.
All right, great. We're really happy to have you here. I know you're an inspiration to me as well as the other founders in Venture for ClimateTech. So let's get started. You've been involved in this space, and in climate advocacy for quite some time. What have you learned over the years? And is there anything about your journey that most people aren't aware of?
Well, I mean, I've been involved in a couple of ways. I'm a writer by trade, and so I wrote the first book about what we now call climate change, what we then called the greenhouse effect, back in 1989, a book called The End of Nature. So I've been at work at this for a long time. And the part that took me a while to figure out was that we were winning the argument, the scientific argument, all of that. We were just losing the fight because the fight turned out not to be about data and reason and evidence. It turned out to be about money and power, which is what fights are usually about. And the fossil fuel industry had so much money and hence so much power that they were getting away with what they wanted to get away with. And so that's when we started trying to build power by building movements. We obviously weren't going to come up with the billions of dollars that Exxon or Chevron or whoever has. But, movement building can allow sometimes the small and the many to stand up to the mighty and the few.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I've noticed that you started talking more about the impact of people's finances and using that as a weapon for climate action. It's really one of the reasons why my co-founder, Bonnie, and I, started GreenPortfolio, because we believe that shifting your money to climate-friendly options is one of the most impactful actions you can take in fighting climate change. And generally, if it's something that's easier for people to do, they're going to do it. And the whole point of this is making it super simple. So I'd be curious, to hear your thoughts on this, along with what you've heard from others who are actively working to defend the planet and use finance as a weapon.
Sure. So I think there's two levers big enough to matter here to move change. One's marked politics and the other's marked money or finance. We've been pulling the politics one to the ground, and it's resulting finally in some change. We've got this bill through Congress finally this summer, and so on. We need to pull hard on the lever marked finance too. We've done some of this work in the past with this massive divestment campaign, getting institutions to sell their holdings in coal and oil and gas, and that's been very effective. We're at about $40 trillion in endowments and portfolios and pension funds that have joined in. And now we're working hard on the banks and asset managers and financial institutions that loan money or otherwise underwrite the fossil fuel industry. Now, I do think it's important for people to move their money individually, but I don't think I think the most important way to do that is in a way that that combines efforts. Because in the short time that we have, any individual action, a solar panel on your roof, a Tesla in your driveway, a greener bank account is by itself not enough to move the needle. And so the reason that I work on these things is in the effort to do, for instance, in the case of the banks, reputational damage to Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, B of A, so that they stop doing what they're doing. And for that to happen, we have to be loud and noisy and join together. So for instance, at Third Act, we'll have a day in March when people around the country are cutting up their credit cards from those banks. At the same time, if you did it by yourself, it's possible that Chase, which has 75 million credit card accounts, might not notice that yours had gone missing. So we need to make some noise as we do this too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, individuals, when we talk, are always wondering how their actions can actually roll up into something bigger. And so when you're talking about collective action and this movement of creating this change, it's great. It's a perfect way to show how one person can turn into the voices of many. With that, I guess one question I had around divestment as well and collective action, if you're driving emissions reductions from corporations, like the pressure that has on them, what are your views on how collective action can drive emissions reductions? And what's your view on like 100% divestment versus pushing companies to be better? Where's that line?
Depends on the company. With the fossil fuel industry, there's no real hope that they're going to change in any significant way. So the important pressure is to divest. I mean, Exxon has known about global warming, we now know, since the 1980s. They had great research all about it. All they've done about it is lie and try to protect their business model for another couple of decades. And that work, they're still fully engaged in both those practices. And it's disgusting. And even if it was completely ineffective, just to avoid being bad people, we should do what we could to get rid of them. But it's very effective to divest from them. Shell said not long ago that divestment had become a material risk to its business, which is good because Shell's business is a material risk to life on planet Earth. There are other companies where probably the possibility for change is more real. So let's look at a big bank, Chase or a Citi. They're producing huge amounts of carbon by lending money off to the fossil fuel industry, but it's not their entire business model. It's 6 or 7% of their deal book. So it's entirely plausible to imagine them deciding, either out of conviction, maybe that's not so likely, or out of pressure, that they want to change their model and stop funding the fossil fuel industry. And that's what we're pressing them to do. And so, for instance, I just wrote a long piece for the New Yorker about these new calculations on how much carbon your cash produces. Companies like Google saw their carbon emissions go up double overnight once people started factoring in these new numbers about exactly how much carbon that cash on hand produces. Google was double. Netflix produces more carbon from the cash on hand than from all the streaming they do. Amazon more carbon from its cash than all its warehouses and delivery vans it owns. So we need those guys to change and to put pressure on the banks to change. Amazon or Apple aren't going to go bank with the local, credit union. They're too big for that. The only way for them to be able to get their work done is to pressure those banks to change. So the short answer is, with big oil, sell; with everybody else, kick.
No, that's a great way to summarize it. Your piece in the New Yorker was really insightful, and talking about the carbon bankroll report that you were mentioning, like it's really interesting at the individual level to understand that, as an individual, you're having this complication. You do have local credit unions or climate-friendly banks you can switch to, but it's a problem that's pervasive also, at the corporate level.
The scale of it just blew me away, Elizabeth. I wouldn't have guessed what the numbers were going to be, but if you have 125 grand in the banking system, it's producing more carbon than all the cooking, heating, flying, driving, cooling that the average American does in the course of a year.
I'm
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, it's like, it's all silent. Like, you don't notice it, you don't know about it. It's as if you went and bought 3 Cadillac Escalades and parked them in the driveway and just ran them all year, which no one would do because it would be stupid. But all of us just blithely stick our money, if we have any, off in some account somewhere and don't think twice.
Yeah, it's something that we're trying to bring awareness to, similarly, working with Bank Forward on that. Like it's really important to understand what your money's up to when it's sitting at the bank, and we're just trying to bring awareness to that. I think it was a report that CDP put out recently where it talks about the emissions, right, of a financial institution. And, when you're looking at scope 1 and 2 emissions, which is more in control of the bank, they all look very rosy.
Yep.
But when you start looking at scope 3, which is where all the lending comes into play, the emissions from that are 700 times more than, scope 1 and 2. And so, it's really important to start pressuring. I agree with you. And it's just for something that once people are aware of, it makes them think, and just making it easier to do that.
Companies and individuals need to think of banks as, in essence, vendors. They're selling you a product, storing your money, providing you financial services, whatever it is, in just the same way that the guy who leases you a car is providing you a service, and you understand the carbon implications of one more easily than the other. But that's what we've got to shift now.
Yeah, agreed. And I love what you're doing with Third Act. And I guess I'd have a question for you too on understanding how generational differences in willingness to switch. Because what we've seen sometimes when we talk about our platform is when people are more entrenched with where they bank, it's more complicated. So I'd love to know what you say to those people.
It's very true. And so part of the thing is you have to make it easy to switch. And part of the thing is you have to start with the things that are less sticky. So that's why we're going after credit cards, for instance. Credit cards are relatively easy to obtain in this country, and they're not as hard as figuring out how to move your mortgage from one bank to another or something. So we'll start there. And lots of people are figuring out how to move their bank accounts happily. And there's more and more options coming. When we began this, we were talking about a few web banks and amalgamated on the East Coast and beneficial on state on the West Coast and things. But there's more and more and more players emerging, some of them large. People are beginning to talk a lot about First Republic Bank in California, about Silicon Valley Bank, which is one of the 15 biggest banks in the country and good at business development. And both of them seem relatively free of fossil fuel ties. So this will, as with, charging your electric car, this will get easier as time goes on. But we need a lot of early adopters to kind of push it forward.
Yeah. And I love your approach to starting with the easiest financial product, which is your credit card, and moving on from there. I guess I'm curious, have you started tackling the industries around insurance, mortgages as well?
Well, there's lots of people at work on the insurance industry, and wonderful organizers that I've gotten to work with, some over the years, trying to take on the big insurance companies. More at this point on kind of reputational grounds than on trying, but more and more people are just saying, Liberty Mutual, we do not want to, we don't want your policy if you can't. I mean, the insurance ones are particularly egregious because these are the people in our capitalist system that we ask to understand risk. They understand risk. They've got all the actuarial data to show what climate change is doing to the planet. They're just too greedy to stop doing the very small percentage of their business that's around fossil fuels. I mean, not only investing in them, but literally underwriting these insane new pipelines and things. You can't build a pipeline if somebody won't give you insurance to go do it. And these companies continue to do it, even as they, even as they pile up more and more data about how much flooding and how many storms and on there are. It doesn't. I got to say, there are moments when one wonders whether there's very much rational about capitalism sometimes. It's not acting on the information that it has.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes something to think about in terms of short-term versus long-term gain, not just from a financial perspective, because it all links into climate.
Right. Well, and of course, the problem here is that climate is a very short-term problem. If we don't solve it in the next few years, then there's not going to really be a long-term. So
yeah, that's the unfortunate is as it becomes more tangible, we're out of time. And I guess we are running up on time ourselves here. So I do want to take one question from the audience. There's a lot of chatter around your take. I know you posted about it today, actually, on Patagonia's announcement.
Oh, I was very, I was very, you can tell because I'm wearing my Patagonia shirt. I'm very taken with everything that Patagonia has done over the years, and this caps it off. Yvon Chouinard's a hero. If all companies worked like Patagonia, we'd be in a good place. Unfortunately, they seem to be the only company at the moment that works like Patagonia. So instead of counting on the goodwill of great people like Yvon Chouinard, we need to go, knock some sense into the rest of these guys.
Yep. Well said. And we're up on time. So I just wanted to thank you again for being here.
All right.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for hanging in there with the technical difficulties. And I agree. That announcement from Patagonia gave me so much, renewed faith in humanity. And so has this conversation. So really appreciate both of you sharing your expertise and time.
They make good clothes too.
So. They do. I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. For those of you going to the panels, you will see it has a nice little thing that says now and sessions. Go there and then you'll get to pick between the two panels. Looking forward to seeing you over there. Bye.